Hello chess friends and welcome to your of Chess channel and welcome back to the tournament where we have every day a beautiful derby. Welcome back to the spectacular Norway Chess tournament in 2024. So I think the most exciting match from the round 8 today was the match between Magnus Carlsen and Praggnanandhaa. We know of course that Prag managed to win a beautiful game against Magnus Carlsen in the first game they played, in which Praggnanandhaa had the white pieces. Today Praggnanandhaa defended the position with I think a really solid game against Magnus Carlsen. He drew very easily. He had I think a solid position from the beginning, really without complications. Prag managed to get a draw, so it meant of course that Magnus Carlsen and Prag had to play now the so-called Armageddon game. And you know the grip, Magnus Carlsen has 10 minutes on the clock and Praggnanandhaa has only 7 minutes on the clock, but of course Magnus Carlsen has now to win the game. So let's see now what happened. The game finished a couple of minutes ago, in my opinion. Really a crazy game. So with the white pieces, Magnus Carlsen opened with move d4. Prag's response was knight to f6, bishop to f4, the London system, d5, e3, and now after bishop to f5 we have now the symmetry. Prag of course wants also to keep his light square bishop outside of the pawn chain, and then he's trying to fix the structure with the move e6. We have now c4 by Magnus, e6, knight to c3, bishop to d6. Prag doesn't want to tolerate of course this powerful bishop by Magnus. Magnus trades it off, but of course the downside by Magnus, okay, you trade it off, but you basically invited now your opponent's queen into the game. We have now queen to b3, hitting the pawn. Prag of course advances the pawn, it's not allowing Magnus to take it. Now after knight to f3 castling, bishop to e2 by Magnus, and now after d takes c4, queen to c4, we have now this idea by Prag. He decoyed now the queen to the square c4, and he gets an extra tempo with the potential move b5, and then also the follow-up is of course c5. We have now kingside castling. Now comes knight to d7 first of all by Prag, and I think this is a pretty equal position, maybe slightly better for white because of the light square bishop activity. We see this small pawn chain is a little bit light square, so in the potential endgame maybe white's light square bishop could be better, but I think nothing spectacular. This is very a solid game also for black. We have a rook from f to d1. Magnus places now the rook where already the queen is, because he anticipates of course that Prag wants to play c5, and then he could have an extra tempo against the queen. b5 by Prag as promised, queen to b3, and now comes this idea c5. d takes c5 comes of course with the threat against the queen, so that's why Prag has to now take with the queen. Knight to d4 by Magnus, chasing the bishop, and after bishop to g6, bishop to f3, Magnus hits now the rook on a8. Here Prag had I think immediately an opportunity to equalize the game in an early stage of the opening. I think bishop to h5 is here perfectly fine. Then after something like bishop to a8 to bishop to d1, rook takes d1, rook takes a8, I would say this is a really equal position. We have also symmetry. You see 4 pawns on this side of the board, 2 pawns on this side of the board. The knights are really solid also by black, so I would say really equalish position. But after bishop to f3, here Prag choose to play I think a more complicated line. I'm not saying it's a mistake or something what he did, but I think this line is much harder to continue, especially when you're having not so much time on the clock. Now you have to really find optimal ideas. Bishop to h5, as I said, would be I think such a beautiful simplifying move that would lead to of course to equalish position. And I think with black, as I said, it's an Armageddon game. You want of course to have just a draw. So after bishop to f3, rook to a7, rook to c1, again placing the rook where already the queen is. And now Prag, he sensed of course the problems of the queen, but it didn't react correctly. I would say he played now the move queen to g5. He allowed here Magnus Carlsen a very interesting idea, which Magnus unfortunately missed. Instead of this move queen to g5, rook to c7 is perfectly fine. You just compete here on the c file, and then after something like knight from c to e2, you can escape, and then at least you're competing against this very powerful rook on the c file. This would be the optimal choice by Prag. But after queen to g5, Magnus had actually here a beautiful idea, queen to a3. That's what I meant. Prag's position is much more complicated now to play. Look at this. After queen to a3, the threat is of course knight takes b5, and you're maybe trying, I don't know, to escape. You might be trying to attack. Look at this. Bishop to e2. You're trying to keep somehow an attack here. I would say Prag's idea was really cool, because he's noticing that here there are 4 pieces that could really cause some damage. But with h3, look at this, suddenly white is solving all of the tactical problems on the king side, and you have to now go somewhere with your rook, because if you don't go with the rook somewhere, then knight to b5 wins simply the rook. You maybe could try here rook from f to a8 to somehow compete on the a file, but now with knight to f3, look at this, knight to f3, bishop to f3, again the rook has to step back, and now knight to b5 again is working. If you play, of course, a takes b5, the rook will be taken on a7. If you take with the rook, then you get checkmated on the back rank. So as I said, queen to a3 would be a really powerful idea. Basically, Pragg would be forced in one moment to step back from the defense of the pawn, and Magnus would grab the pawn and would have, I think, a solid endgame. So that's why here after move queen to g5, Magnus didn't also play the correct choice, queen to a3. He played now knight to c6, hits the rook. Okay, still white is pretty solid, but as I said, queen to a3 much more powerful. Knight to e5, great counter attack here by Pragg. Of course, if you take the rook, then we have knight to f3, and then the position is collapsing because 4 pieces, as we mentioned, would dance simply in front of white's king. So that's why after knight to c6 and knight to e5, Magnus took. We have queen to e5, and again the position is solid. Pragg made an inaccuracy with move queen to g5, but also Magnus made the mistake with move knight to c6. Now the position is again equal, but Magnus continues now with the aggressive a4. He doesn't want to tolerate, of course, the space advantage that Pragg built here on the queen side. We have b takes a4, queen to b6, first of all, intermediate attack against the rook. The rook has to be covered, and now Magnus plays knight to a4. Pragg, of course, doesn't want to take, because if you take, then again you're inviting your opponent's queen into the game. But actually queen to b6 I think would be still possible. Pragg continued now with the move h6, at least creating some breathing spaces for the king. And again, I would say this is an equal position, nothing romantic is going on. Pragg has to first of all somehow connect his rook. That's, I think, the most important thing that he has to do, somehow getting also the rook from f8 somehow into the game. But so far, as I said, nothing also spectacular for Magnus. Bishop to e2 by Magnus, hitting the pawn on a6, and now Pragg plays knight to d5. This is not such a powerful idea because this knight gets a little bit exposed now in the center of the board. A better choice is, as I said, just queen to b6. Look at this, knight to b6. You continue the pressure here. Maybe you can cover, but now you attack the rook. Now maybe after a couple of trades of pieces, we take this one. White takes this one, and again, I would say pretty solid, equal position for sure. I'm sure that Pragg in this particular line would manage to get a draw. So he had the chance to simplify the game by trading off the queens, but he didn't play that, and now he allowed Magnus here to get back with the queen to d4, and connect, of course, here the queen to the pawn on b2. a5, knight to c5, beautiful square for the knight, of course, queen to b6, and now bishop to f3. This is a very important idea now by Magnus Carlsen. Magnus wants actually to trade off the bishop for a knight and go in. He's trying to go in a favorable endgame where the knight on c5 is much more powerful than the bishop on g6, because this pawn will be also on the lie square, and it's hard to defend this pawn. So Pragg can maybe escape with the knight, but you see there are some tactics. If you move the knight somewhere, then there is this problem of knight to e6. If you take queen takes e6, and then of course the rook is hanging. If you take the queen here, then of course we simply get the knight and we grab the pawn. So that was the mistake by Pragg. After bishop to f3, he's basically forced now to play rook to b8, and Magnus now finally takes. Bishop takes d5, e takes d5, and I think in this position White's knight is much more powerful here than a bishop on g6. b3, good move by Magnus Carlsen. He connects now the pawn to the knight. The knight is very amazing here, really stunning knight here by Magnus Carlsen. Rook to c7, Pragg continues the pressure, and now knight to e6 by Magnus. Pretty cool idea to simplify the game again by trading off the queens. And now the knight is even more powerful. This knight cannot be kicked away by any minor piece, by any rooks anymore from this amazing square. The knight is connected to the pawn on b3. Magnus Carlsen has a really compact position. And now I'm not saying this is winning or something, but it's really easier to play now Magnus Carlsen game here from White's perspective. Rook from b to c8, trying to trade off the rooks. Magnus is of course not interested because he's going simply for this weak pawn on a5. Bishop to c2 by Pragg, a mistake. A better choice is simply to defend. Rook to a8, simple idea, forcing Magnus Carlsen to somehow maybe double up the rooks, but here with the move bishop to c2, Magnus again had the opportunity to play something like rook to f1, and I think actually he would then win the pawn, because for instance if you try rook to a8, now you attack the bishop, and now if the rook steps back, then we take the pawn, and this would be, I think, I would even dare to say completely winning endgame here for Magnus Carlsen. This was after move bishop to c2, rook to f1 should have been here Magnus Carlsen's move, but with the move rook to c1, he allowed here actually Praggnanandhaa to get back into the game, because Pragg found, of course, bishop to d3, rook takes c7, rook takes c7, and now f3. Again, white is slightly better because of this powerful knight that's connected to the pawn, but now the rooks are off the board. Just one rook is on the board, so I think again, if black now plays the game correctly, this should be, I think, a solid draw. But of course, Magnus is pushing after rook to c5 by Pragg. Magnus goes, of course, closer with the king, h5, king to e1. Magnus king is much more active, and he can have access to the d2 square. The bad thing for Pragg is that, of course, you cannot attack the second rank because the knight is protecting the square c2. We have g6, king to d2, bishop to f5, and now rook to c1. Magnus goes now into the fully endgame stage, but now Pragg found a beautiful idea with bishop to d7, here the move a4. After a couple more moves, you see king to d4. Magnus has now centralized the king, but now a4 leads now, I think, into really equal position, with, of course, we have to say it, maybe the knight slightly better than the bishop, but nothing spectacular, because Prague's king is close enough to the action, and again, if black plays now the game correctly, again, this should be a draw. But Magnus is, of course, an endgame beast. He continues now to push this position. He doesn't have, he cannot lose anything here. He has to win the position. If it's a draw, if he's losing, of course he is losing, but at least he's trying to do something now in the spectacular endgame. Bishop to b3, h4. We have bishop to a2, g4, trying, of course, to create a pass pawn here on the h file. We have h takes g4, f takes g4, and now king to e7 by Pragg. I think also bishop to b3 should be pretty solid. You can stay here, because after h5, actually you can allow this pass pawn to be pushed, but now in one moment you simply step back, and even if knight to d5 happens, bishop to d5, king to d5 can be played here maybe by Magnus Carlsen, but actually again it's a thematic draw. We simply go for this pawn. Magnus would of course go for this pawn, and now after a couple more moves again this pawn can be taken. The only trick after bishop to b3 and h5 here, what you could do is not even take out the knight, just push the pawn further, but again the same position would apply. King to f6, we go for this pawn, and we take out the queen, you take out of course the bishop, and with these two pawns again it's a draw. So after f takes g4, what Pragg did was a little bit risky. He played now king to e7 immediately. This was not good. He should have simply stayed with the move with his bishop on b3. After f takes g4, king to e7 by Pragg. Magnus of course takes. We have now king to e6, e4, bishop to b3, and now knight to f4, king to f6, g5, kicking away the queen, and now centralizing the king here by Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen is getting closer with the king. Bishop to c2, Pragg attacks now the pawn. Very important move, because he's not allowing with this move Magnus Carlsen to get closer with the king on e7. After bishop to c2, knight to d5 by Magnus, and now comes, I think, the huge blunder by Praggnanandhaa. Maybe just for fun, pause the video and try to see now here the best continuation for black. Still it's a draw. It's if black plays the game correctly, but unfortunately for Pragg, he missed his drawish idea. If you want to study maybe really end games, this is a perfect position for you. So what would you do now in this particular position with the black pieces? Okay, the most important thing is actually to not allow here white to get the king on e7. If you allow that, then it's, I think, winning for white. But after move king to here knight to d5, what Pragg should have played is actually king to f8. Let's see now this line. If you try here knight to b4, then you simply step back to b1, and you see now if the kings move somewhere, we'll simply pick up the pawn. Again, maybe white is trying with knight to c6, but you simply stay on this diagonal. And what should now white do? White can just maybe repeat moves, and you stay on this diagonal, never allow the king to be closer, because after king to f6 or something, then we play bishop to e4, and it's of course a draw. But what Pragg did, he played now the move bishop to d3, and this is a huge problem because Magnus has now this resource. Knight to f6 protects now the pawn. You have to now play maybe king to f8, but it's a little bit too slow. Now you see Pragg has this pawn, pardon me, Magnus Carlsen has this pawn defended and can actually march with the king towards the e7 square. Pragg is of course trying to stay on this diagonal with the light square bishop, but Magnus goes even closer. We have bishop to b1, knight to d7 check. You see now, and after move e5, Magnus simply gets this e7 square, and I think the game is over here for black. Really, really crazy position. So here after move bishop to b1 by Pragg, Magnus continues with knight to c5. We have a bishop to c2, knight to b7, knight to d6 by Magnus Carlsen, bishop to a2, and now maybe just for fun, again, if you want to practice some endgame ideas, pause the video and try to see now the winning idea here for white. White moves and wins the game. Very, very cool idea here by Magnus Carlsen. Okay, here Magnus found a beautiful knight takes f7, sacrificing even the piece here, but this pawn is marching. Of course, if you take, then the problem is now wherever you go, I don't know, you go here, then we can play, of course, king to f7. You have to step back, and again, the game is over here for black. So here after move bishop to f7, e6 by Magnus, we have bishop to g8, and now after move king to d7. In this position, Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa resigned. So he doesn't have even a square for the bishop. He has to again sacrifice the bishop for the pawn. If he tries something else, then this pawn cannot be catched anymore. If you play with the king, then e7 comes with the tempo, then again the promotion. So again, a losing game here for Praggnanandhaa. So Magnus Carlsen won his Armageddon game today. Hikaru Nakamura lost his game, his Armageddon game against Alireza Firouzja, which means now that Magnus Carlsen has now a whole point in front of Hikaru Nakamura. So Magnus Carlsen is now the sole leader after 8 rounds of this really, really amazing chess tournament. Again, he could win everything here. So really, really great games he played so far. He lost only one game, we have to say, against Praggnanandhaa with this dubious line in the Sicilian in which Pragg destroyed him really with spectacular tactics. But here Magnus played really solid chess without many inaccuracies, blunders and similar stuff in really fast time format. So congratulations to Magnus. He has now everything in his hands. He is of course now the favorite to win the Norway Chess tournament in 2024. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really, really crazy stuff. You see, the end game stage is a different stage of the chess game. It's really sort of, I don't know, different dimension of chess. You have to be beast to understand everything in a fast time format in this types of position. Magnus is really the end game master and is now, as I said, the deserved leader of this brilliant chess tournament. So if you want to see some other games that we have covered here on my YouTube chess channel so far from this event, here are some links of some games. And if you like this content, hit the subscribe button. See you soon with some more videos. And what do we say in the end? Chess is the best, of course.